Hey Dunchbags, what's going on? It's Landon Remixes here, and welcome to my review of the 6th studio album from the Italian DJ and producer Benny Benassi. This one is called Danceaholic. Benny Benassi had his heyday back in 2002 and 2003 with his electro house club smasher Satisfaction, and we didn't see a lot from him in the following years, but we did see the producer get a resurgence of popularity in 2011 when Skrillex released his remix of his song Cinema featuring Gary Go, which of course Skrillex ended up taking most of the credit for, but to an extent Benny Benassi did get an amount of recognition for the song, as we saw Benassi climb the DJ Mag Top 100 polls in both 2011 and 2012. Danceaholic is his first album since that surge in popularity in 2011-2012, meaning that it's been a full 5 years since he's put out a full-length album. I can't say I was extremely excited to hear this Benny Benassi album, especially because I think a number of the singles he's dropped in the last couple years on Ultra have been way too commercial. And finally going in to listen to this full 18-track album, I can't say I was more impressed than I thought I was going to be. In fact, I'm arguably much more disappointed, especially because he had such a number of awesome guests on this record that I thought were going to make more stellar appearances than they did, including Richard Judge, John Legend, Mogai, Vassie, Bully Songs, Christian Burns, and of course Mark Benjamin and Chris Brown. I have nothing against producers that want to collaborate with a number of vocalists and producers, but on this album we have 18 full tracks, and only 4 of these lack both a co-producer and a vocalist. If you remember my review of Kygo's Cloud9 album, I thought that was one of the major downfalls, is that there were way too many vocal guests. And I feel like in large part this was part of the downfall of this album as well, especially on tracks like Carousel, which I feel like could have gone a lot better as instrumentals, and I thought the vocals were way too repetitive on this thing. Although it didn't have a technical feature, I kind of felt the same way about the track I Want to Be a DJ, which comes toward the end of the album, and I actually was surprised toward the beginning of the track because I thought the production was one of the more unique tracks and was probably going to be one of my favorites until the vocal kicked in, which, just listen to it yourself, it's probably the cheesiest thing in EDM you'll hear all year. I'm going to try to be short and sweet with this review, so if I just had to sum up the entire album in just a few words, I'd say this album is practically nothing but commercial progressive house music. Not to say Benny Benassi doesn't branch out in any other directions in this album, because that would be a complete lie, but out of an 18-track album you'd expect maybe a little bit more diversity. This entire thing's basically sticking to one sound the entire way through. The thing about this is that it might be okay for some producers, but this isn't even a sound that Benny Benassi invented on his own. I think the biggest thing throughout this is the track Paradise, which sounds like it could have come out in 2013, even though it was this year's single. The track practically and almost identically copies Borges's Invincible, which was a single that released a couple years ago. And just to be straight, I think the majority of the sounds on this album could have been on a 2013 album, leading me to think that these were a number of singles that he made in the last couple years during that period, and then Ultra just decided to throw it together because he released a pretty big single this year. In fact, I think the only track that's remotely keeping up with a 2016 sound is the track Universe featuring Bully Songs, and I'm primarily thinking this just because I can hear a bit of a future bass influence which is blown up in the last 2015-2016 years. Although I wouldn't even necessarily call that track one of my favorites just because I typically love Bully Song's appearances in his other features, but on this one his vocals honestly sounded just so cheesy and thrown in. You get the little ba 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 ba, the same kind of sound that really pushed me away from John Bellion's vocals in Zed's Beautiful Now last year. Now don't get me wrong, I think there are a couple of decent to good appearances on this album. I especially liked the collaboration with Father Dude and David Zoe, Pandemonium, which I felt like had a strong Disclosure influence, and of course, although I do love this sound, it's really hard for me to get into just because I feel like it's ripping off so heavily from their style. I think one of the other major factors of this that made it quite a disappointing album is that some of my favorites are the older sounding ones, which actually really screwed with me. Back to the Pump, which is the album's closer, is also one of the oldest singles to be released on the album. It's not even a new version of the track or anything, I just thought the electro house sound of this one made for a pretty solid banger. One could also argue in some places on this album that he's trying to keep up with the bass house scene, but I don't really see any strong appearances of that genre. Basically, there's not much else to say in this album that I didn't explain in my short summary. This is basic commercial special dance music. He had a lot of great guest appearances on this one. He had a lot of potential to put out an awesome album. Even cutting this album back from 18 tracks probably wouldn't have saved it. For Danceaholic, I am feeling a 1.5 out of 10. If you guys haven't listened to this, you may or may not want to, but if you do, I have the stream linked in the description so you can go check it out. If you have listened to it already, let me know what you think in the comment section below. I'm curious to see the opinions of anyone that actually really loved this album and why they did. Anyway, I'm Landon Remixes. I hope you guys enjoyed this review, and I'll see you later. Peace.